Thank you for encouraging me. I prepared a longer paper which will be published in the proceedings, and I tried to summarize the content of this paper, giving for granted that many concepts that I will use are known, even from those of you who are not dealing with international politics or international economics. One of those concepts is order, disorder, chaos. The ones working with international affairs are believers that the world is founded on chaos. Chaos is kind of empty space which should be filled in a way or another. And politics, government, the states, most of the time try to do this job, how to settle, how to give order to a kind of natural disorder. Disorder especially is related to the state's behavior, and mostly international affairs than in internal affairs. In internal affairs, the state ruled, make laws, constitution. Most of the time it works, or there are revolutions, they change and they restart again. Anyway, the states are looking for order. Instead, in international affairs, often the image given by international affairs is that international affairs do not like order. They live in disorder, even in chaos. They feel better. Let's put to the extreme this concept. When we look at the Mediterranean affairs, we find probably in the present time the best example of what I just said. So the first question to be raised is how order can be established in international affairs, and especially Mediterranean, to set limits to disorder or even chaos, as we said. The second question is how to enforce that order with respect to the chaotic situation in the countries of the Mediterranean, which, in my analysis, is not the Mediterranean bordered by the countries looking at the Mediterranean, but goes to Asia, Central Asia, and to the Gulf in a way or another, because as geopolitics and geoeconomics are concerned, this is really one region. I call region, we may discuss a lot, but let's call region. The incapability of the Mediterranean states to set order in the region, what is evident, requests a solution. Where the solution may come from. Could it be a democratic solution, let's call democratic, or should it be imposed? And other questions. Let's try just to go through. Of course, when we say international community has to give order, first comes United Nations, United States of America, the universal organization and the power of our time. But would it be enough? Well, one of the things I am going to tell you is that no, the answer is no, is not be enough. Because we need a model of relations in the area which could last and which could be able to solve the problems which are originating the tensions, even the wars, splitting, uprising, terrorism. We know that when we talk about Qaddaism, for instance, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic State, or whatever you want to call it, these are responses which are giving wrong response, we may say, wrong output coming from the disorder. They are not the generator of disorder. They are bad response to an existing disorder and imbalances, which, of course, accrued disorder and imbalances, but they are one of the responses. So if we don't go to the roots of the problems, we do not solve the problem. This is what I'm trying to communicate to you. I wish just to quote for a moment the lesson coming from Carl Smith's analysis. We can share or not his position, but what is interesting here is that he starts from analyzing the world as an empty space, which is precisely where we are, order, disorder, chaos. In Carl Schmitt's analysis, the word always, this empty space always is filled in by a power. He deals a lot with certain periods of history, 16th, 17th century, but this is the theory. So let's go now to see in practice what we may derive from that lesson. Number one, to transform chaos into order is not an easy or sweet operation. It's a chirurgical operation. Land and space are cut in different parts, and each of them is subjugated to a process of sanitization. I make the concept extreme to provoke your mind. This is a traumatic and suffering process, and most of the time it is imposed by the powers in different periods of human history. In that context, international relations could be assumed as a work in progress, aiming at imposition of the order, top down. With the immediate heavy consequences in international affairs, you may expect. Another writer, Karl Kraus, would object, let the chaos be because the order did not work. No, we need order. Instead, we need order. Second consideration, nature, when we say nature, we look at animals, forests, we are some of nature, but nature is another thing. Nature shows a permanent and insurmountable horror vacui, as the Latin said. It fears and refuses empty space. It suffers kenophobia, or kenophobia in Greek. International politics also suffer empty space. One of its fundamental rules is that empty spaces are immediately filled. Geopolitics teaching says that international relations can be analyzed as a continuous uninterrupted filling of the entire surface of a space. What is that filling? Filling is neither a pacific process nor an ethical ruled process. In most cases, it appears generated and melted with aggressiveness. Most of the time, it looks as the pure and hard expression of power politics, sense of supremacy, arrogance, instinctive search of survival and imposition. If we look at times which most of us were looking at, Cold War period, we remember the Domino Theory, for instance. Now, the domino effect has a lot to share with the above consideration. Domino's preservation means no empty space ready to fall in someone else's hands. Dominoes. If we look at George Kennan's containment theory, which was at the source of American policy during the Cold War, once again, containment means this is our space, this is yours, don't come here because this is ours, we do not come there because this is yours. Once again, it comes back the same idea. The reference to Kennan gives opportunity to exercise the first criticism I'm proposing to your attention. And the criticism goes to USA use of force in respect to keeping order in international affairs in general, and in this area in special. During the recent decades, with very few exceptions, America initiated many wars to foster international order and left in supplementary disorder the grounds where it fought. At this respect, the examples of present-day situation in Iraq and Afghanistan are eloquent enough. The roots of the two crises were different in nature and different were the reasons for intervening. In both cases, America contributed to accrue disorder in terms of security, economic growth, social and cultural conditions of population. The result was dramatically equivalent also in terms of regional disorder. The civil wars in Syria and Libya, together with the weakness of the new Afghan and Iraqi regimes, set conditions for the Islamic State ambition to territorial expansion. That's why I quoted before Al-Qaeda and IS. The vacuum of power in Iraq after Saddam, the lack of governmental control over a large part of the Afghan territory, together with the splitting and conflicts in Syria and Libya, had a direct effect in establishing conditions for increasing the global regional disorder, opening the power vacuum with the Islamic State aims at filling through the setting up of its caliphate. Don't forget that the IS programs say that they wish to come to Rome, to my hometown, and change our flag from white, the Pope, to black. Consideration number 3. Territories, with very few exceptions, are essentially the anthropic geography they show, the inhabitants. From ever, the territories bordering the Mediterranean basin, together with the inhabitants, suffered the cupidity of different external powers, and we have seen some, and were consequently purpose of external contention and conflicts. It happened because the Mediterranean houses the cradle of the three main monotheistic religions, is the preferential maritime road from industrial Asia, or the old way from the old China, but it was the same, and the now growing Africa to the rich markets of Europe, and hosts an incredible infrastructure of accesses to Arab, Gulf, and Central Asia's gas and oil fields. It's very attractive, Mediterranean. Everyone is aware that Mediterranean populations contributed by their own to the excess of foreign presence. And here we could enlarge, but I try to be short. By the way, we know how tribal is the Mediterranean culture, family-like, clanic, tribes, it's a splitted culture, few sense of nations, no sense of the state, etc., etc. This gives conditions for disorder and foreign intervention. No way. Probably only the so-called Francophonie, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, shows a certain state legitimacy or conscience, but in general, even in Italy, sometimes we fear that the sense of state is very, very poor. So the weak legitimacy of the states contributed to the overwhelming influence and presence of foreign power in economic, military, and political terms. This is the assumption. The gloomy picture does not only refer to the southern countries. Portugal is still poor in most part of its territory and left authoritarian regime only in 1974. We always look to the southern shore, but the northern shore also gives problems. Spain, which came to democracy only after the death of Franco in 1975, suffers skyrocketing structural rate of unemployment, especially youth unemployment, social and territorial imbalances, separatism in Catalonia and Basque territories, and in the near future, a worrying institutional confrontation between Republicans and monarchists is expected, and the likely disruption of the bipartisan regime at the next election, which guaranteed democratic and economic growth in the last 40 years in favor of a populist, communist, leftist-led new parties. Greece, which was back to democracy only in 1974, thanks to the failed invasion of Cyprus by the junta, shows a disrupted economy and a financial collapse. I don't have to enlarge. Here again, the two historical parties, PASOK and Nea Demokratia, are not more in government, and we don't know what could happen of Greek politics. Cyprus is still a divided country, with Turkish army occupying the northern part. I don't need to talk about Turkey. You have seen the recent elections and what happened, and once again, you know the situation of the present Turkish regime against Kurdish ethnic population. Once again, I cannot enlarge, but I give for granted that most of the things I'm referring to are known. By the way, Turkey continues to be a pillar of NATO in the region, is the door to Russia, is the door to Middle East. So imagine how calm we may be when we look at the turmoils inside Turkey, which is fundamental in the strategic situation of the region and the Mediterranean. Then if we go to the south, once again, I don't need to enlarge, so discouraging is the situation. Egypt is under military regime. The claim is we have to stop Islamic Brotherhood. Israel and Palestinians are back to old practices, you know, the so-called knives intifada, which is coming to Europe with the same techniques. Syria is broken and destroyed by a ferocious and bloody war, which may expand at any moment to Lebanon. Libya, you know, it's split into probably more than two parts, and is candidate to partition. Maghreb, Tunisia is fighting to save its spring against the attacks of terrorism and internal fanatics. Morocco raises walls against its Arab citizens instead of finding a constitutional solution. From long years on, Algeria is trying to escape the consequences of a ferocious fight with Islamic insurgents against the regime expressed by the National Liberation Front movement. I mean, none of those countries looks, you know, in normal conditions. So, in the Mediterranean region, we have this situation, and where no clash of arms is spreading, mass migration, ethnic internal discrimination and strife, economic and social malaise appear. It is the case of the Balkan area, now pacified thanks to foreign armed intervention and the dream of landing someday to European Union environment. So how we made to set up the Mediterranean order, if such is the disorder? In strategic terms, the fact that more than half of the maritime global traffic transit through the Mediterranean, more than half, makes impossible that the disorder goes too far. And the number jumps to 90% when we consider only oil-sea traffic. Once again, the question is, global economy could support these risks in the Mediterranean? Even in this situation, the traffic of goods during the last decades increased 123% in 10 years. Nowadays, about 20% of world traffic of goods happens to dock at the Mediterranean ports, with an increase of 4% in 10 years over the previous rate. Between 2001 and 2014, the lines of the goods to and from the Gulf and Middle East and to Extreme Orient increased respectively 160% and 92%. It's growth. of traffic which should be guaranteed. Now, if we share the realist theory means power of state, just to synthesize, that order, if we share the realist theory that order to such a strategic area shall be granted by any power having capability and ability for doing it, we consequently accept the need of using the force, giving for granted that to practice soft power would not be enough to push nations to cooperate for international order. At the same time, we are aware that for the first time in human history, public opinions in America and Europe lean to refuse the war as an instrument of international relation. It is not by case that the war planners are theorizing unmanned war, drones, etc., where the human factor on ground tends to disappear and drones or other machines substitute it as much as possible. We are also aware that traditional wars are no more effective in solving the international crisis. This was one of the criticisms to USA I proposed. One of the reasons is that after the Second Iraq War, the last traditional war in present times, we could say, they are no more shaping themselves neither as authentic international conflicts nor as pitched battles. They instead express themselves as internal, civil, ethnic or religious conflicts impossible to be managed through the traditional use of force. It's a useless instrument, the war, the traditional war in present times. Let's go to idealism, the other big theory. Idealism looks more to international cooperation. Idealism never worked in the Mediterranean region. Every time a minded leader tried to inspire unions of states and or integration of economies, he failed. We may recall the efforts to realize the union of Arabic Maghreb between Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Mauritania, and Libya, the failed union between Egypt and Libya, the disruption of the project for a common flag between Egypt and Sudan, the difficulties of Agadir 2004 Treaty of Free Trade between Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Jordan, and those concerning the arrangements for a free trade between Turkey, Morocco, Tunisia, and Palestinian Authority, the stop to the growth of GAFTA, the Greater Arab Free Trade Area, and others. International cooperation doesn't come to be effective. Regional. We may also recall the failures of the European Union or community before repeated offers of cooperation and integration to the southern shore, before setting up, thanks to the imposition of the French presidency, the Union for the Mediterranean, whose secretariat is in Barcelona, but this is something less than a simulacrum of the needed Euro-Mediterranean policy. We had Barcelona Chart in 1995, which gave a lot of hope. Even the organization I manage was created in this environment, but everything changed, unfortunately, in bad, not in better. So fractions of gay groups. So if we search to a model to settle, to give order to the region, what may we do? Let's be clear on the roots of disorder, otherwise we cannot operate on order. As for the internal and domestic factors, I could record the following. Lack of political democracy in most southern countries, and consequently a lack of social and political consensus among the populations to the leaders. Second, social and economic huge inequalities, creating discontent among the population and a large potential for insurgents and unrest. Third element, demographic pressure, resulting in a large number of young unemployed and analphabet or quasi-analphabet people, with consequent pressure on migration, marginal and Greek activities, a fertile greenhouse for the Islamic terrorism recruitment. As for the external and international factors, the following may be recorded. The religious heavy confrontation between Shiites and Sunnis inside Islam, in fact becoming a confrontation among the states belonging to one of the two factions of the Muslim believers, resulting in a contribution to instability and disorder. Look at the heavy fighting for leadership in the Gulf, which comes to the Mediterranean through money and affiliates to the same faction, let's call it this way. Iran and Saudi Arabia, every one of us is aware, are not precisely friendly nations, and they export to the Mediterranean their tensions. Look at Gaza Strip situation or Lebanese situation, just to make you aware of that. Second element, the same applies to internal matters through the evidence of foreign interferences, the involvement of Shiite Iran and Sunni Turkey in Syrian conflict, respectively in favor and against Assad, etc. The unresolved Palestinian situation, of course, with the scandal of a nation deprived of its multi-millennial heritage and forced to survive as a refugee in its own land. The civil wars, another element, the civil wars erupting in the region as an effect of the internal factors listed above and resulting at this very moment in the horrible list of slaughters taking place especially in Syria, Libya, and Kurdish territories. Migrations, of course, which look savage migrations, in effect from the wars and conflicts, going to the first-line states, Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon, Serbia, Croatia, and Italy, Greece, and in a way, Spain and Europe. Military uncoordinated and random actions of external powers, this is another element, is not NATO, is not United Nations, is not European Union. Each country, we will look at the response which France will give. No way that they will respond to what happened yesterday, but it will act as France. And Britons did the same, United States. I mean, everyone is going in a way by its own, even if the propaganda says we are coordinated. But what happens is that is once again a national intervention. Look at Libya with French intervention, just to understand what I mean. Both internal and external factors originate what has here been called the Mediterranean disorder, resulting in phenomena like demographic pressure, Islamist war, Islamic terrorist actions in Europe, fundamentalist attacks, the downsizing of trade and investment north-south, which of course is going to worsen the situation, harming the growth of the Southern Europe countries whose economies are structurally open to relations with the Mediterranean, Northern Africa. EU is about 80% of the external trade of Morocco and Tunisia, and more than 50% of the Egyptian foreign trade. Imagine what happens when war and disorder is there. As we said, part of responsibilities for the present-day situation belongs to the United States. After imposing to previous colonial European powers to withdraw from influencing the Southern Mediterranean politics and assuming the role of the sole true guarantor of security and political evolution, USA made fundamental mistakes as far as crisis management was concerned. Number one, it did not act as an honest broker in the controversy between Israel and the Palestinian nation, de facto tolerating the risky path of Israel chose in the last 2 decades after the Labour Prime Minister Isaac Rabin assassination. Second, it never elaborated a comprehensive project to give order to the region in alliance with the Europeans through NATO and European Union. US did something like for Eastern Europe after the falling down of the communist regime. It did not in the Mediterranean. The bilateral alliances with local regimes, first of all with Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, worked for American interests. They did not work for the regional stabilization order. It never completed the military job it decided in different decades to carry on in the area. From Lebanon in 1958 to Syria and Iraq nowadays, US opened Pandora boxes and never closed them after finishing the dirty job it initiated. As a result, the crisis continued to last and bleed, causing additional infections and renewed conflicts. Even more responsibilities belong to the Europeans and to their comprehensive institution, the European Union. Here I don't want to enlarge, I said already that all the politics done by the European Union vis-à-vis the Mediterranean were just starting and never being completed. No much investments, it didn't work. Europeans, by the way, the Europeans were effective in trying to solve the Israeli and Palestinian situation through the Oslo Agreement, Sweden action. Then, as you know, everything was unfortunately dramatically stopped by the assassination of Rabin. The problem here is, with the sunset of Obama presidency and the coming election, no major American initiative can be expected in this very season, and even the new president needs time to realize something new, if he wish. In the meanwhile, the crisis grows on. Russia and China are entering in the Mediterranean heavily with ships, armed ships, trade, investments, even territories. Sometimes is the policy of China, buying land for agriculture, buying rights in the ports, etc. And as I said, nothing could be expected by European Union for the time being. So, none of the above behaviors results able to create conditions for order and security at the border of Europe. So once again, what can be proposed? Which kind of model should we imagine? The answer is, the only model which could work should start from a kind of magic word: inclusive regional model. A model of inclusion, not of a model of exclusion. And I try to explain that and I terminate. I will not be too long. Inclusive means populations, legitimate governments, economic national interests, foreign powers as element of stabilization. The legitimate request of population aiming at their future should be respected. Palestinian, Kurds cannot be kept as they are. They will always be source of disorder in the present day conditions. Third, economic and social, human, let's call it this way, conditions should be guaranteed, the minimum. This is probably the role of Europeans more than of Americans. Restart a European policy to the Mediterranean, create a true free trade area between Europe and Northern Africa to realize, to be back to Barcelona chart in a way. And of course, security. Security has to be guaranteed. We have seen how important is the Mediterranean. And here comes United Nations and the powers, including Russia and China, because we have to be realistic. Europeans are no doubt the most interested, the most touched by the Mediterranean crisis. More than 1/3 of the foreign direct investments in the area comes from European countries. More of the half we have seen of the trade comes from the Southern Europe countries. And Europe donates land, billions of euro every year to those countries, but it's really peanuts in a way in respect to the needs. USA is a champion of global powers, where Europe is a champion of regional power. So you have to mix global interest and regional interest. I try to rush because the time is going on. Why the Springs failed, for instance. The Springs in Arab countries were fueled by United States foreign policy more than from the Europeans. Was too early? Well, the example may come from Soviet Union. America never requested to Soviet Union to become democratic. It requested not being aggressive, not being democratic. And the assumption was democracy will come at appropriate moment. Well, why don't we act the same with Arab countries? First, stabilize the region, and then democracy will come at appropriate moment. If democracy, it could look as a kind of cynical European Machiavellian theory, but this is what it has been practiced and worked. The peers are good when they are mature, not when they are green. You understand what I mean? There are not conditions nowadays for going straight to democracy, apparently. Not in all the countries. Let's see Tunisia. Tunisia is the only example which is trying to survive. Let's see what happens. But the priority is order and security. First, survive, the Romans said, primum vivere. So you survive and you live if you have security and order. May I recall, well, we don't have time. So this is a kind of realistic approach. Then in case with the debate, we may go deeper in that if you are interested in that. But now let's go to the idealistic way. Idealistic means that you cannot solve the problem if you don't have United Nations, international cooperation, European Union, together with the nations in the area working to the new model. What is happening in, you know that some week ago in Vienna was opened the process to pacify Syria. How do I look to the decision taken there? They terminated with a kind of 12 points. The powers did not assume the responsibility. They said United Nations has to do the job. United Nations is not able to do the job if the power do not give conditions for doing the job. So just to resume, from the two main theories of international relations, idealism and the realism, I tried to expose in as short as I could a model of inclusive open regionalism, which is reputed at certain conditions to be able to move the region from disorder to a shared new order, guaranteeing security and growth in the region. European Union could act as a regional power. United States as a global power together with China and Russia, and the nations there could be pushed to move on to development, more social justice, and the other things I said. Thanks for being patient with me.